Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to Uno's Garden. Uno's Garden is a story by Graham Base that we're going to read today and stop and do some math along the way. Uno arrived in the forest on a beautiful day at the very beginning of spring. There to welcome him were 10 magnificent Moopaloops and one completely ordinary Snortlepig. Uno loved the forest so much that he decided to live there. I can see on this page Moopaloops, plants, and a Snortlepig. Do you see any buildings? As we watch the video, you can stop at any time and you can count the different animals, plants, buildings, and see if you can find that tricky Snortlepig. I know on this page there are some different plants. Along the top, I see a picture that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different plants on this page. So I'm going to count one of them. I'm going to look for the mushroom-looking thing, and I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the mushroom things. What if I were to count the purple fern? How many purple ferns would you see? Go ahead and pause the video and count to see if you can find out. What number sentence could I use to show the number of plants that are on this page in Uno's Garden? I have two number sentences here. I have 10 plants, and every plant there are 10 of. So I could do two sentences. I could do repeated addition with 10 times. Or I could write a multiplication sentence that says 10 times 10 to show the number of plants in Uno's garden. Uno decided to climb above the treetops, and the forest seemed to go on forever. Swinging through the branches were 9 leaping lumpy bums and the completely ordinary Snortlepig. Can you see that Snortlepig? How many lumpy bums do you see? What about the number of plants? How about the buildings in Uno's garden? Do you see anything changing? I see, along the bottom, there are 9 different plants that are on the page in Uno's garden. How many plants would you see in all on the page? You can pause the video and see if you can count them. What number sentences could you use to show the plants? You're right. I could use repeated addition again to do 9 plus 9, 9 times. Or I also could say 9 times 9, because now there are 9 plants and there are 9 of each. I'm noticing some pattern in the book already. Let's keep reading to see if the pattern continues. Well, others decided to follow Uno because they loved the forest too, and they built houses and boats, and they were watched by 8 feathered Frinklepods and the Snortlepig, of course. Uno began work on a little garden. How many Frinklepods do you see on this page? I see some of them. There's even one that's hiding. How about the number of plants or buildings? And can you find that Snortlepig? Here are the different plants that you would see on the page. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 plants on this page. Go ahead and pause and count those plants. Count the Frinklepods and see if you can see changes in the buildings or anything else. What number sentences could I use to show the plants on this page? You're right. I could use repeated addition again or multiplication. Here are 2 different sentences that I could use to describe the plants. This is an image that explains how we write those out. So, boys and girls, what do you notice about the numbers in this story so far? Why don't you pause the video and turn and talk to a person sitting next to you about what patterns you're noticing in the numbers in this story. The fisherman's children played games among the trees. They counted 7 playful puddle boots plus 1 Snortlepig, and a tiny little village grew. So how many puddle boots do you see? What about the number of plants, buildings, and where is that little Snortlepig? I see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of plant on this page. Let's see if you can count and find how many of each type of plant there are. Using the patterns you've seen before, I bet you might have some predictions. What number sentences could you use to show the number of plants that you counted? That's right, multiplication works, and so does repeated addition. I have 7 times 7, or I can add 7, 7, 7, 7 times. Now on this page, some hunters went deep into the forest and they were looking for those sneaky snagglebites. But there were 6, and the hunters didn't catch them or the snortle pig. So, can you count those snagglebites? How many plants do you see on this page in Uno's garden? What about the number of buildings? Is something changing in the forest and in the garden? And how many snortle pigs do you see? There are 6 plants on this page. See if you can pause the video and count to see the number of plants. What number sentences could you use to show these plants? That's right, I could use multiplication or repeated addition again as 2 different ways to represent the number of plants in Uno's garden. Here's a picture that shows that as well. Well, some other things continued to happen after the hunters. Then the tourists came, and they saw 5 timid tumbletops. But that was all. Uno kept working in this garden, and the village then became a town. How many tumbletops do you see? What about the number of plants? How many buildings? And what about the snorkel pig? It looks like on this page there are 5 different plants. How many of each type of plant do you think there will be? Could you make some predictions based on the patterns we've seen so far in the story? What number sentences might you use to show the number of plants? You're right. We moved from 5 plants, and in our pattern so far, we've used multiplication and repeated addition, and we've noticed that the number of plants is the same as the quantity of each plant. So 5 times 5, or I could add 5 times. Here's the other picture that shows what's happening in the story. Did anyone find that snorkel pig? So take a minute, boys and girls, and I want you to just think about what's happening to the number of animals and plants compared to the number of buildings in this story. Let's go ahead and pause the video and turn and talk to a partner. Then the railway was built. Excited passengers watched for all the wild animals. They caught a glimpse of 4 grazing gondolopes. And what was that other funny-looking creature back there? How many gondolopes do you see? What about the number of plants? How many buildings do you see? What about the snorkel pig? Is he still there? I see, in this page, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different buildings on the page. And the numbers below represent how many of each building. I want to know, what number sentences could you use now, instead of to show the number of plants, to describe the number of buildings? See if you could think through 2 different examples. I could do 16 plus 8 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1, or I could take 16 and combine another 16. I wonder where that second 16 comes from. And here's the visual that shows the thinking of what's happening. If you notice the plants, you would see that we're down to 4 plants, and there are only 4 of each one. So now our small town has become a city, and a team of scientists arrived to study all the animals. 3 flipper flaps was all they found. Do you see anything else on this page? What number sentences could I use to show the number of buildings on this page? Let's see what buildings are on. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different buildings in the background, and the numbers tell me how many of each. I could represent that a couple different ways. Take a look at those 2 and see if you figured out the same number of sentences. You could see the number of plants has decreased to only 9, and the number of buildings we're at is 64. Well, the city keeps growing larger and larger, and the forest keeps growing smaller and smaller, and some of the workers came across 2 pointy pricklebacks. They had never seen anything like them. What number sentences could you use to show the number of buildings now in the background? Let's take a look. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different buildings. I want us to think about the pattern we're seeing in buildings so far to figure out these 2 sentences. And here's the picture of what's happening with our plants, buildings, and animals. Then, a lone fisherman set his line in the river. He caught a car tire, several old boots, and a cold. He didn't see the snortle pig. In fact, nobody had seen him in so long that people weren't even sure they existed. And here's what's happening. Do you see our one sad tree and our one lonely and sad snortle pig? And look at the number of buildings. What's happening to the numbers? Finally, one gray morning, the people of the city woke up, looked out over the endless buildings, and were sad. Why do we live in a place like this, they asked themselves. There are no trees. So they left. 0 animals, 0 plants, and 512 buildings. The city was dark and abandoned, and Uno opened his door and looked out. Sitting there in his garden among the plants that Uno had saved was one snortle pig, completely ordinary in every single way, except that it was there. The snortle pig lived in Uno's garden for many years, and the city crumbled, forgotten. The snortle pig grew old and died, and so did Uno, but the garden lived on. I want us to stop and take a second and look at a table to see if we can figure out the numeric patterns. You can go ahead and pause the video here. Take a look at the animals, and I want you to think about what patterns are happening with the animals. Here's a pattern with the plants so far in Uno's garden. Go ahead and pause the video and talk about what you're noticing with the number of plants. Here are some multiplication sentences that match with the picture of plants. Let's see if we can figure out our totals and see what's happening to our pattern here. If 10 times 10 plants is 100, see if you can work through with a partner or your class the answers to the rest of these problems. So, Uno's children continued to care for the little collection of trees and plants, and slowly the forest returned. The children kept a diary of discoveries: 2 pointy pricklebacks, 3 flipper flaps, even 4 grazing gondolopes, 5 timid tumbletops, and over the years, even Uno's grandchildren added to the list, with 6 sneaky snagglebites and 7 playful pedal boots. And their grandchildren added to the list too, with 8 feathered frinklepods and 9 leaping lumpy bums. Finally, 10 magnificent loopaloops. And on a beautiful day, in the very beginning of spring, we would see that the forest and the city found themselves in perfect balance. Take a look at our multiplication sentences here. Now we have back to 10 animals, 10 plants, and 10 buildings, all with 10 of each. And we're balanced. Here's a look at those animals close up. See how happy they are working and living in the same area of the town with the people in the buildings in balance. So, what continued to happen? Stories continued to be told for days that an extraordinary creature lived in Uno's garden, and the children often listened with wide eyes. They never stopped believing that one day they would see a real-life snortle pig for themselves. We can stop the video here, and you can discuss with your teacher and your table groups what you notice about the patterns today we're looking at in the numbers of animals, plants, and buildings. I'm going to enter these equations straight down. I want you to take some time to figure out what patterns you're seeing. I see the animals are subtracting or decreasing by 1. I see the plants are squared numbers. Square numbers are when a factor is multiplied by itself, and the buildings are numbers that are doubled. See if you can talk about these patterns, go back and look at the pictures, and think about what might happen next in Uno's garden. Thank you for listening to the story today, and I hope you enjoyed the book.